So I just wanted to make a follow-up video to the last video where I was talking about how robotic affirming and other techniques, as great as the techniques often are, aren't a magic pill. They're not a special technique that's going to work for everybody. The special technique that's going to work for you is yourself. You got to find out what works for you. That's what we're always talking about on this channel. And I just wanted to make that clear. And, you know, to give a little bit, again, like I always like to do this, you know, when I make these car videos, to give a little bit of the broader context of why I say that. You know, this isn't like me, for instance, bashing on Sammy Ingram. Okay? I want to make that clear because this is YouTube and social media frenzy and all that stuff, right? There's a ton of stuff that I totally disagree with when it comes to Sammy Ingram's advice and what she says and how she carries herself, her personality. But generally speaking, I think that her approach towards robotic affirming is really, really good, and it's a really good technique for a lot of people. And to take it a step further, you know, the reason I like Sammy's approach so well is it links with Coué so well. But what I try to remind people of, at least occasionally, is that Coué's approach has a ton of flaws too. Coué's technique, his conscious autosuggestion technique, is flawed, at least for a lot of people. Just like every single one of these techniques is going to be flawed for a lot of people. It's not about the technique, it's about you. Now, today I thought I could briefly talk about some of the rather obvious, if you take a step back, flaws of Coué's approach. I've noticed this in my own life, and I've noticed this working with clients, and then you notice this just in the larger manifesting community. Like if you're on Reddit or if you read comments and stuff like that about how affirmations work for people. We've made videos about this before. You know, affirmations fail a lot of people, right? And that's what I always try to remind folks who get into like robotic affirming or any type of affirmation process. Just like people who get into SATs or like a Neville technique or journaling or whatever the technique may be, it has to fit and align with where you are at right now. Your personality and sensibility right now. Not next year or not last year, but right now. And if it doesn't, it doesn't work well. So for Coué, the reason, first of all, that I like him so much and consider him, in my eyes, to be a superior teacher of these manifesting principles, these law of attraction, law of assumption principles, whatever you want to call them, a superior teacher of that stuff. Again, it's not because of his technique. It's because he explains the principles, the psychology of what's going on behind the principles better than anybody else, in my opinion. Just more practically and more effectively than anybody else. So you can implement Coué's advice in your life, even if you're not doing conscious autosuggestion as your technique. I know for me, that's generally the case. I love Coué. I go back to him more than any other teacher. He's the only teacher that I've consistently studied with regularity for years on end. Not Neville, not Joseph Murphy. You know, none of these other teachers have I really stuck with. You know, other teachers like Murphy and Neville I go to sometimes, but I'm not regularly looking at them. I'm not like daily looking at them, which is often the case with Coué. You know, I've said before, Coué is a great guy to have breakfast with, to read his advice and just kind of, you know, think about it some. But it's not the technique that I'm reading about that interests me so much. The technique's fascinating for the same reason that a lot of the stuff that Sammy talks about is fascinating. But it's the underlying explanation of the psychology of your imagination at work that really, really interests me and I find very beneficial. But if you're just trying to do conscious autosuggestion, there is a good chance, unfortunately, that you're not going to be satisfied with it. And that's why, of all the books and guides I've written, the one that I like least, for sure, when I think about it in retrospect, is 5-Minute Finances, which is just a very short guide about using conscious autosuggestion and saying, something like every day in every way I'm getting wealthier and wealthier, or every day in every way I'm getting better and better in the way Coué suggests, and having, your life improved by doing that. That's good sound advice, but I got to tell you, it's not going to work for a lot of people. It's going to work for plenty of people who are relaxed and believe in doing it, but it's not going to work for a lot of people. So I don't regret writing that guide, because it's a very simple approach. And if you're relaxed while you do it, it will improve your life and improve your finances. But here's why it won't work, and why Coué's advice doesn't work well for a lot of people sustainably long term. It requires faith and confidence that it's going to work. Like basically any of these techniques, if you're doing them long term. Robotic affirming, it doesn't require much faith and technique, and faith and confidence that it will work if you're doing it short term for a couple days, or periodically over a couple weeks or a couple months. It doesn't take a lot of faith, but you have to have the confidence to do it and the faith to at least do it, right? But to see substantial changes in our life and substantive change that is, significant and that we can continue to build upon, to see our life get better and better in many different ways, the way Coué talks about. You can't just say every day in every way I'm getting better and better, over and over again before bed and in the morning, and expect it to do much unless you have faith and confidence that it's working. And again, that's why I mentioned in the last video, Caleb saying that any technique is a placebo to have you believe it's working. And Coué, much like Neville and a lot of these law of attraction teachers, but Neville and Coué are really good examples of this, both of them. If you were with Coué, if you were in his presence, he was a master at giving you confidence and faith that this technique was going to work. He was a master at that. In the same way that Neville, if you saw him speak, I would have to think, for many people, he was so articulate and so persuasive and so certain that this worked, that it was very easy for you to be persuaded that it worked, for you to have faith and confidence. Coué might have even been better at this than Neville. He was truly a master hypnotist. Coué was. Conscious autosuggestion is basically self-hypnotism. That's what Coué said that. He wants to make that very clear. But the hypnotist really is the person that is making you hypnotize yourself. They facilitate you self-hypnotizing yourself. And Coué was just the best that I know of at doing this for the masses, for many, many people. He was incredibly persuasive. Incredibly persuasive. He filled you with self-confidence and faith that this was going to work. And so he very often helped people cure themselves of their ailments, whether they were mental or physical, or, improve their relationships or their financial situation, because he was that persuasive. But what we see is that the changes that he was able to get people to believe they were able to do for themselves, the self-hypnosis he was able to effectively get his patients and clients to implement, basically, was often not sustainable. They'd go back and see a lot of the people that Coué helped and that had cured themselves, and their life hadn't really changed. They had healed from their ailment, but their life hadn't profoundly changed a year or two later. They were unable to build upon the foundation that Coué had given them. Coué gives you a great foundation, but then you have to build on it, like any of these manifesting teachings. And that is what I think is important to understand, and is very subjective in terms of what works for you and what does not work for you. And it's why, there's not one magic bullet. There's not a magic technique. And Coué, for all of his genius and for all of his wonderful, helpful, spectacular, life-changing information, which I would love to see spread all over the world and, made many more people pay attention to what Coué said. As spectacular as all of that is, he's just laying a foundation for you. And the foundation is not going to do much if you don't have a real level of self-confidence and faith that this is going to do something for you effectively. If you don't believe it, it's not going to really do much of anything. Napoleon Hill, for instance, in Think and Grow Rich, he mentions Coué and says, you can say day by day in every way, I'm getting better and better until the cows come home. And unless you do it with faith and perseverance and confidence, it's not going to do anything. And Napoleon Hill was right. And we've heard that again and again. That's a very valid criticism of Coué's method, his conscious autosuggestion method. And it's a very valid criticism, obviously, of these other teachers talking about affirmations, more so. You know what I mean? You have to build faith, and you have to have confidence in yourself. And there's no one formula to do that. That takes your whole mind and body. And, one thing you can do if you don't believe that you have confidence, you don't have faith, is you can robotically affirm or affirm in some way, I'm building faith. I'm becoming more confident. I'm becoming full of more faith. My faith is growing. Because if you do that, even if you don't believe it at first, if you do that over a short period of time or just keep on doing it, it slowly will do something. But if you don't believe it and keep saying something and it still seems far, far away, like you're trying to manifest an SP, a romantic partner, and it does not seem realistic at all, if you don't have confidence it's actually going to work or have faith that it's actually going to work, that's actually going to work, without that faith and confidence, it's not going to work in all likelihood. Again, this is common sense. This is understanding soberly a lot of these psychological principles. How can we work with our imagination instead of working against it? These techniques are supposed to make us able to work with our imagination, but you got to find what works for you. And that's what we're always trying to explore. So I hope that was clear. If you think I could be a help personally, I'm offering 15-minute free consultations currently to see if my coaching is a good fit for your needs. And if you have any general questions about this topic, I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com. Until next time, be well.